Every day, the videos our fans send in get crazier and crazier. Today, we're revisiting 25 of the most insane wrecks we've received in the last 4 months. Hold on, it's gonna be a bumpy ride. Hunter was headed to work one morning while it was both raining and snowing. He admits he should have been driving below the speed limit of 55 miles per hour given the conditions, but he was late on his way to work. As he crested a hill, he saw what looked like headlights in the distance. Only too late did he realize they were actually reverse lights in his lane. And when he swerved to miss the pickup truck, he ran right into its plow. Hunter's Chevy Cruze slid into the snowplow even though he was standing on the brake pedal. The impact totaled his Cruze and destroyed the plow attachment. Hunter called 911 and the road conditions delayed first responders for 15 minutes. Neither of them requested medical attention, but that ended up being a mistake as Hunter had bruised ribs and tinnitus from the collision. Insurance investigators found the pickup driver at fault, and his insurance provider gave Hunter enough money to replace his Chevy Cruze with a used 2021 Nissan Altima a week later. I think we can learn 2 lessons from this story. Slow down when the road is slick, and get checked out by paramedics even if you feel fine in the moment. Ernie was headed to Costco for dog medicine when an oncoming driver ran a red arrow and turned in front of Ernie as he proceeded through a green light. The T-bone impact rolled Ernie's Toyota 4Runner completely over before it ended up back on its wheels. With his doors stuck and windshield shattered, he ended up climbing out through the rear hatch with the help of a bystander. Ernie filed an insurance claim with his dashcam footage as evidence after responding police officers retrieved his dashcam for him. The other driver's insurance provider accepted liability and cut him a check for $40,000 US. Obviously, his 4Runner was totaled, but he used the insurance settlement to replace it with a new one in the same color, along with an improved dashcam with both front and rear angles. Unsurprisingly, the cops told Ernie that the other driver had claimed Ernie had run a red light, and his dashcam footage made all the difference. If you need a dashcam, we put a link to our recommendation in the description. Shia was driving down a ramp leading from one highway to another. Suddenly, he encountered a wrong-way driver coming straight toward him. Shia swerved into the other lane without having time to see if it was clear. Miraculously, he made it through the mayhem without a scratch. He called 911 but couldn't stop because he had a car full of passengers. Nelson was driving down a California highway when he encountered a CHP traffic brake, which is when a patrol vehicle drives back and forth slowly across all lanes of a highway to slow down traffic for an incident up ahead. Nelson and most other drivers noticed the sea of red brake lights ahead and came to a stop, but one driver behind Nelson wasn't paying attention and rear-ended another vehicle at highway speed. The vehicle that was initially hit was pushed past Nelson and into several other vehicles. Thankfully, Nelson wasn't involved in the collision. He was late for work, so didn't stay, but he hopes everyone else was okay. Here's something Chuck didn't expect to see. A BMW driver was speeding down a wet highway when they lost control and slammed into a guardrail. Chuck called 911 to report the incident, and later when he came back the other way, the BMW was gone. Chuck, who was also driving a BMW he's had for a month, told us this was technically an example of a BMW driver failing to signal while changing lanes. Don't be one of those BMW drivers, Chuck. Break the cycle. Dave was on his way to visit a friend on a beautiful Friday morning. When a white SUV pulled out in front of him, it blocked his view of a gray sedan that also turned in front of him. With no time to react, Dave collided with the rear door of the gray Honda Accord. Police responded to the scene and cited the Honda driver. Both vehicles were undrivable and had to be towed away. Thankfully, nobody was injured, and the Honda driver admitted fault and apologized. Dave's insurance claim is still being processed, but sadly, his Volkswagen Passat was totaled. Dave told us his girls are big fans of both Wham Bam Dashcam and Wham Bam Tesla Cam. So shout out to Alice and Olivia. Marco didn't stand a chance against a Honda Pilot. When Marco proceeded legally through a yellow light, the driver of a Honda Pilot turned across his lane, failing to yield to oncoming traffic with the right-of-way. Marco told us the other driver claimed to have a green light, but the dashcam footage reveals that isn't possible. Either their turn arrow was still yellow, or it had turned red, just like the light facing Marco's direction. Regardless, it couldn't have been green while Marco's light was still yellow. He's now fighting to have his repair and medical bills paid for by the other driver's insurance provider. Patrick was driving down a road in California when an oncoming Nissan driver lost control while racing a Mustang and hit Patrick head-on. The Nissan Altima slammed into Patrick's Toyota Camry. He estimates it was traveling at between 60 and 70 miles per hour at the time of the impact. Thankfully, Patrick wasn't seriously injured. Police and firefighters responded to the scene. Patrick wanted to shout out Francisco and Philip and said they're all fans of our channel. Thanks, guys! This submitter is a trucker who had a Civic driver wander a little too close to his big rig. Our submitter told us the young driver miscalculated his merge. With 16,000 pounds of cargo in his truck, it took him a long time to stop, even standing on the brakes. Thankfully, the other driver's only injury was a nosebleed. He admitted fault and they hugged it out, according to our submitter. Sadly, the Civic was totaled, but our submitter was able to get back to work. Jeffrey watched a red Mustang sideswipe a white Nissan Leaf, starting a chain reaction that would ultimately involve Jeffrey's Ram 2500 as well. Jeffrey told us that every southbound lane of the highway was shut down by first responders until the wreckage could be cleaned up. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured in the collision. Angel was waiting at a red light when an oncoming driver ran right through it. The driver of a Dodge minivan caused a 5-vehicle collision when they ran a red light and got hit by a Toyota SUV. That impact sent the minivan head-on into a Mini Cooper, which was then shoved backward into Angel's Honda Accord. The 5th vehicle involved was a Chevy pickup that was barely damaged when the Mini Cooper hit it while spinning. The other 4 vehicles were all totaled, and Angel got a check for $24,000 to replace his Accord. The minivan driver was found responsible for all damages. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured. Angel told us he's thankful we are all alive and kicking. He also asked us to please encourage everyone to get a dash cam. KN was headed to work early one morning when a box truck merged ahead of him into the express lane. Suddenly, the truck driver locked up his brakes. KN found out later that a vehicle up ahead had cut into the lane and forced other drivers to slam on their brakes. And the ripple effect continued until the box truck lost control and rear-ended the car ahead of it. Thankfully, KN was able to stop and avoid getting involved in the collision. Everyone pulled over and a passing CHP motor officer stopped and made a collision report. KN provided a copy of his footage to the insurance companies. Scott was waiting to make a left turn when another driver turned across traffic without waiting for an opening and got T-boned by an oncoming car. The car was spun around by the impact and was nearly pushed into Scott's Prius before rolling forward. Scott pulled over to make sure everyone was okay, and he gave a copy of his dashcam footage to a responding deputy. Scott wanted to shout out his daughter, who was singing "Stressed Out" by 21 Pilots when the collision occurred. Dennis was driving his Honda Civic down a Texas highway with his girlfriend, who was visiting from Canada, in the passenger seat. Suddenly, a semi-truck merged into the side of them, sending the car spinning out of control. Dennis said it was unfortunate that this happened while his girlfriend was visiting, but he's thankful neither of them were seriously injured. The trucker took responsibility for the collision and said he hadn't seen Dennis's Civic. He asked for a shout out for his girlfriend Jennifer, who flew home as scheduled the day after the collision. Lauren was on her way to work when she watched a Chevy Spark get rear-ended by another driver who never even tapped the brakes before the impact. Lauren suspects the driver of the red car was on their phone when they clipped the back of the Chevy, pushing it under the trailer of a semi-truck we can see earlier in the video. She gave a copy of her footage to responding police. She hasn't heard any updates, but she told us she and her boyfriend are huge fans of our videos and our merch. Thanks, you two! If you want some for yourself, the link to our merch store is in the video description. Ryan was heading to visit his parents after work one day when the driver of the white Subaru in front of him didn't realize a driver ahead was stopping to wait for oncoming traffic before making a left turn. Without enough time to slow down and stop, the Subaru driver veered into the oncoming lane before colliding with the Ford Escape the other driver had been waiting for in the first place. Ryan called 911 and first responders arrived 3 minutes later. The couple in the Ford Escape were actually his parents' neighbors, and Ryan provided them with a copy of his dashcam footage. He caught up with them a week later, and they told Ryan the footage had been very useful for their insurance claim. Advait found out what happens when a speeding convertible loses control on the highway. At over 90 miles per hour, the convertible lost traction before slamming into the back of a box truck. Both vehicles pulled over, but Advait doesn't know what else happened as he wasn't able to stop. Watch what happens when a pickup hits a car, hits a pickup, hits an SUV, before the pickup driver who started the whole thing speeds off into the night. Lexi was on her way home from work when a black pickup truck sideswiped a black Toyota. That impact shoved the car into the side of another pickup truck, which then wedged an SUV against the median barrier. After ricocheting off the barrier, the black Toyota ended up in front of Lexi's Jeep Cherokee. Even though she tried to avoid getting involved, she wasn't able to keep from hitting the Toyota. A total of 5 vehicles were involved. When police responded, they collected everyone's insurance info and then told Lexi she could leave since they'd put the info in their report. Only later did she find out that everyone actually meant everyone but the driver of the black pickup, since they'd fled the scene. Her own insurance provider ended up paying for the $5,000 in damage to her Jeep. Lexi has sent her dashcam footage to the police, but they told her that even if they could read the license plate, they wouldn't go after the driver because their face isn't visible. They said the driver could claim that their truck had been stolen or that a friend had been driving. Lexi said, apparently you can just hit and run whoever you want since the cops won't do anything about it. Kyla was driving her Pontiac Vibe when the driver of a GMC Yukon failed to yield to her at an intersection where he had a stop sign, but she didn't. When the Yukon began crossing the road in front of her, Kyla had no opportunity to stop before slamming into it. Thankfully, firefighters arrived only 4 minutes later to provide aid. What was the Yukon driver's excuse for causing the collision that totaled Kyla's Pontiac? He told the police he didn't see her car approaching, in spite of the clear line of sight he had long before he started across the road. Kyla wanted to take this opportunity to remind our viewers that you shouldn't sit too closely to the steering wheel, as this can cause injury in the event of a collision by preventing proper deployment of the airbag. Chris was headed to a work event with his girlfriend in their new car, a Kia Niro PHEV they'd gotten license plates for less than a week earlier. When traffic ahead of them slowed down, Chris slowed down as well. Sadly, the driver of a work van behind them failed to notice the slowdown. Even though he swerved, he still ran full speed into their Kia's quarter panel, ripping off one of the van's wheels in the impact. The van also collided with the driver ahead of them before finally pulling over. The driver was apologetic while his coworkers transferred the contents of the van to another one so they wouldn't miss their deliveries. The driver of the black pickup that stopped told Chris it didn't look like the van driver had even tried to slow down. Police responded quickly, but paramedics took over an hour. Thankfully, there were no serious injuries. After a month and a half in the shop, the insurance company totaled their vehicle. They'd sold both of their cars to afford it in the first place, and now they'll be looking for a replacement. Eric sent us this footage from a dashcam in a company semi-truck. Eric told us this truck was being driven by Quincy, who wasn't hurt when an oncoming semi was hit by a hydroplaning SUV, sending it into the temporary median barrier. The impact sent the Jersey barriers sliding into Quincy's lane, where they were struck by a car that had been passing Quincy's Peterbilt. The highway was shut down for cleanup, and Eric told us police responded in under 5 minutes. Jared was bringing his daughter home from school when a Pineville police officer driving a Ford Interceptor SUV turned in front of him.
Come on, man.
Oncoming traffic prevented Jared from swerving into the oncoming lane as he hit both the brakes and the horn. He told us the patrol vehicle had to be towed away due to damage done to the steering mechanism. His BMW was also damaged, but he told us the city paid for the repairs. He wanted to shout out his girlfriend Elizabeth and all of his kids and told us, "We all love your videos. If you do too, be sure to subscribe for more." This submitter was driving down a Florida highway with a speed limit of 65 miles per hour. When traffic slowed down to about 55, the driver of the pickup ahead of him didn't notice until it was too late. Even though the pickup driver tried to swerve around the red Nissan, it rear-ended the corner before continuing down the road. Out of the view of our submitter's dashcam, the red car then sideswiped a black SUV. All 3 drivers involved pulled over to exchange information. Our submitter called 911 before quickly uploading his dashcam footage so he could provide the link to the police and the involved drivers. And to us, of course. When an oversized tow truck turned through an intersection, the driver ahead of our next submitter ran the red light before T-boning a crossing SUV. Our submitter stopped and got contact information for the victim and the responding officer so he could send them his dashcam footage. He told us he would have given it to the lady in the car too, but her car was stuck in the road and she wouldn't get out, so he chose not to stand in the middle of the road to talk to her. Nico was driving through Vegas when 3 street racers went flying past him on the highway. Before they could speed off, one sideswiped another vehicle, pushing it into a concrete barrier and sending sparks flying. Instead of stopping, the racing driver then took off. Once Nico recovered from the shock of what had happened, he called 911 and reported what he'd seen. He told us he saw multiple people stop to help the victim, who was able to safely pull over. Sadly, it seems that the driver responsible sped off into the night and was probably never held to account.